Have you ever walked into a place and felt, without anyone saying a word, that you didn't belong? Now imagine this. You're seated beside a restroom. Your food arrives cold. The staff treats you like an inconvenience, and no one knows. You actually own the place. Sounds like a movie plot, doesn't it? But what happened that night wasn't fiction. It was a quiet storm. A moment that started like any other golden Friday evening in Savannah, Georgia. Sunlight melting into brick walls, street lamps flickering on like fireflies, jazz swirling through the air like perfume. Shops buzzed, heels clicked on cobblestone, and laughter spilled from doorways like champagne. Inside one of the city's most upscale restaurants, Sterling's, everything gleamed. Candlelight shimmered across polished silverware. The air was filled with the subtle symphony of clinking glasses, murmured conversations, and the soft hiss of the open kitchen. Waiters moved like dancers, their smiles well-rehearsed, their steps choreographed. It was the kind of place where elegance didn't just exist, it was expected, where your seat in the dining room often said more about you than your words ever could. And that's when he walked in, not in a tailored suit, not with fanfare, but with presence. Dwayne Johnson, 53 years old, broad-shouldered, calm, composed, quiet power in every step. He wore a simple white shirt, neatly pressed but without pretension. Navy slacks that spoke of practicality, not price tags. His shoes, though modest, had been polished to a quiet shine. A leather satchel rested on one shoulder. No watch, no flashy rings, no designer cologne to announce himself. And yet, when he entered, the atmosphere shifted, slightly, almost like the air had bent, just enough to acknowledge that someone important had arrived. But Amanda didn't see that. Behind the hostess stand, she looked up from her reservation tablet, catching sight of him. And in that one moment, just one, her smile slipped, her expression flickered. The hospitality mask she wore daily cracked ever so slightly. Then came the shift, the micro-expressions only trained eyes would catch, the narrowing of the eyes, the tightened corners of the mouth, the way she scanned him, not to welcome but to assess. Amanda wasn't just a hostess. Her name tag read assistant manager, gold-plated, polished like a badge of honor. But that night she wasn't wearing a title, she was wearing a judgment. Dwayne gave a small nod. His voice, when it came, was low, clear, steady. Table 4. And please, he didn't offer an explanation. He didn't apologize for existing. And still, his voice landed with weight, the kind that didn't beg for space. It expected it. Amanda tapped her tablet, pretending to scan availability. The restaurant was far from full. Open tables waited like invitations. A perfect two-seater. By the window, a cozy booth near the fireplace, another spot beneath the pendant light at the center of the room. But those weren't the options she offered him. With a sigh too loud to be real, she gestured toward the back. Past the kitchen, past the crowd, past decency. There's something open. You're back here, she said. A table shoved next to the janitor's closet, a stained wall bubbling from steam. The faint scent of bleach hung in the air like an afterthought. It was the place no one wanted, but somehow the place she decided Dwayne Johnson deserved. He didn't argue, he didn't flinch. He simply looked once at the elegant, untouched table at the room's center, then turned and followed her to the shadows. Because this wasn't new. He'd been seated in corners before. But tonight, he wasn't just a customer. Tonight, he came to watch, and by the time he stood again, he wouldn't be the one answering questions. He'd be the one asking them. Dwayne followed Amanda in silence, each of her steps sharp and clipped like the ticking of a metronome. The restaurant's ambiance softened with each footfall away from the warmth of the central dining room. As they moved farther into the shadows, it was like stepping behind the velvet curtain of an elegant illusion. Out of sight, Out of significance, she led him to a table tucked between a janitor's closet and the restrooms, an awkward little alcove where the air smelled faintly of lemon bleach and metal drain pipes. The walls bore the bubbling scars of steam damage, patches of paint warped and discolored from years of neglect. Overhead, a flickering fluorescent light buzzed like an annoyed insect. It gave off a sickly pale glow, too harsh to feel warm, too weak to feel clean. The table wobbled, slightly, and the chair creaked under him like it resented his weight. Still, Dwayne sat down calmly, his back straight, his movements unhurried. This wasn't the first time. Not by a long shot. He unfolded his napkin and placed it neatly across his lap. There was no resentment in the motion, just grace. Dignity wrapped. In routine, his eyes scanned the room briefly, noting the untouched table at the center again, the one she refused to offer. It still sat there under the warm amber pendant light, polished and waiting, a throne in the open. But he had been handed the storage closet. Amanda returned moments later with a single menu, her fingers pinched around its edge, like she was handing over a dirty rag. She didn't speak, she didn't smile. She simply dropped it onto the table and turned back around before he could even say thank you. And Dwayne didn't try, because in this game, words were currency, and she had already decided he was broke. As he opened the menu, a strange detail caught his eye, a small stain on the page, near the lower corner. It looked like old sauce or wine, something dried and forgotten. It hadn't been cleaned. For most people, it would have been an oversight. For Dwayne, it was a signature, a reminder that this menu had probably been passed around the less visible corners of the restaurant for years, reserved for customers like him. Still, he read the menu slowly, as if each dish had history. He didn't scan for prices. He wasn't looking for flair. He was searching for something honest, something made with care. Trout, asparagus, herbed potatoes, unsweetened iced tea. That would be enough. No dessert, no appetizer, no need to perform. When Amanda returned, her presence announced itself before she even spoke. The clicking of her heels on the floor was louder now, like a challenge. She approached the table with a posture more suited for a courtroom than a dining room. Arms crossed, eyebrows raised, her voice artificially sweet. "Well," she chirped, "made your decision, sir?" The word "sir" hit the air like sarcasm dipped in syrup. Dwayne nodded once. Yes, the trout with asparagus, herbed potatoes, iced tea unsweetened. Amanda blinked, as though she didn't expect that kind of composure. Then she smiled, a sharp, condescending thing. "Ooh, look at you," she said, dragging the syllables like nails across a chalkboard. "Living large tonight, huh? That combo's what, $27? Must be a big day." He said nothing. But here's the thing. Silence can be thunderous when used by the right person. Amanda leaned in slightly, lowering her voice like she was about to share a secret meant to wound. "You know, we get guys like you all the time. Roll in here thinking you're fancy, trying to make a paycheck meal look like royalty. Order one halfway decent plate and act like you own the place." A flicker of something crossed her face. Satisfaction. Maybe. She expected a reaction. Maybe anger, maybe shame. Instead she got stillness. Dwayne's expression didn't change. His eyes didn't narrow. His lips didn't curl. He just looked at her directly, steadily. In that way, only people who've had to prove themselves more times than they care to remember can. His gaze didn't ask questions. It collected data. It measured her. Amanda shifted slightly, uncomfortable, under that kind of quiet. Then she straightened up and smiled again, this time with teeth. "I'll put that in," she said quickly, stepping back. "Enjoy your splurge." She turned on her heel and walked away, muttering something beneath her breath. Dwayne didn't catch the words. He didn't have to. The tone was enough. It was the same tone used when people talked about those customers, about them. It always hovered somewhere between condescension and contempt. As she disappeared, Back into the polished sea of central tables, Dwayne sat quietly. His hands rested gently on the table, fingers tapping slowly. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm was unhurried but deliberate, like the ticking of a countdown no one else knew had started. Around him, life continued as if nothing had happened. Laughter rang out from a table nearby. A couple clinked wine glasses. A child giggled, delighted by sliders shaped like stars. Plates passed from tray to table in a graceful ballet. But here, in the back, the air was heavier. It didn't smell of rosemary or buttered garlic. It smelled of bleach and unseen battles. Then came the food, or rather, the delivery of it. Amanda returned, this time without flourish. She didn't glide or smile or announce herself. She dropped the plate onto the table like it offended her. The silverware followed, clattered next to it like tools tossed into a mechanic's tray. "There," she said flatly. "Bon appétit." The sarcasm in that last word was thick enough to chew. Then she turned and vanished again. Dwayne looked down at the plate. The trout was dull, edges curled like wilted leaves. The asparagus was limp and colorless, like it had been boiled to submission. The potatoes were gray and clumped. No garnish, no artistry, just food. Or rather, the idea of food, an imitation of hospitality. He reached for the napkin again, unfolded it and placed it neatly over his lap. Then he looked up, not for help, not for validation, but to bear witness. This wasn't about taste, it was about message. He picked up the fork, slid it through the fish, and took a single bite. He chewed slowly, thoughtfully, like he was memorizing every dry, overcooked detail, not with disgust, but with documentation, because this wasn't the first insult he'd swallowed, but it might be the last one he ever had to. When he looked around the restaurant again, he didn't see diners anymore. He saw the stage, he saw the audience, and he saw something Amanda hadn't. He had the mic now, and the show was just getting started. The trout was flavorless, dry as chalk and coated with just enough grease to leave a film on Dwayne's tongue. But he didn't spit it out. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he took one more slow bite, folded his hands in front of him, and let the silence settle like a fog. That's when it happened. Not loud, not dramatic, just one sentence. Calm. Low. Measured. "Excuse me," he called. His voice wasn't raised, but it cut clean through the ambient clinking of forks and glasses. Amanda froze where she stood across the room, visibly annoyed by the interruption. She exhaled hard and sauntered back toward him, her arms crossed, before she even reached the table. Her mouth was tight, eyes already narrowed with the same expression you'd reserve for a telemarketer at dinner time. "Yes?" she asked, the word so sharp it could have sliced steak. Dwayne gestured lightly to the plate in front of him. "Is this," he asked, "how this dish is normally served?" For a second, Amanda hesitated. She tilted her head to the side, gave him a slow once-over, like she was trying to decide whether the question deserved an answer at all. Then came the smirk, the same one she wore when she seated him next to the restroom. "For people like you," she said with a scoff. "Sure, we save the fancy touches for real customers." The words didn't come out in a shout, but they struck with the sting of a slap. She hadn't whispered them either. People at nearby tables heard it. Heads turned slightly, forks paused mid-air. Still, Dwayne's expression didn't change, just the slightest tightening of the jaw, the subtlest shift at the corner of his mouth. He didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. Instead, he calmly picked up his fork, slid it through the trout one last time, and took a final bite. Not to finish the meal, but to finish the insult. He wanted to taste it, remember it. Amanda lingered awkwardly, for a beat, waiting for a reaction that never came. She sneered and walked away, her heels striking the floor like drumbeats of petty authority. Dwayne set the fork down. This wasn't about food anymore. It hadn't been since he was told where. He was allowed to sit, This was about something else entirely, about how far someone was willing to push another human being before they pushed back. A moment later, he stood. No anger in his motion, no show of resistance, just a quiet rise, a slow scrape of the chair, legs against the tile, and a stillness that made time hesitate. His footsteps were measured, headed toward the main hallway, past diners, past tables dressed in white linen, past polite laughter that now rang a little more artificial than before. That's when her voice stopped him cold. "Sir." Amanda again. She said it louder this time, and it snapped through the air like a ruler across a school desk. Several heads turned. Dwayne stopped mid-step and slowly turned around, one eyebrow raised ever so slightly, an invitation for her to continue digging her own grave. Amanda walked toward him briskly, arms folded, lips pursed. "I'm going to have to ask you to stop right there," she said, her tone drenched in corporate condescension. Dwayne blinked. "Excuse me?" Her eyes scanned the hallway behind him, and she nodded toward the restroom door. "That bathroom is for customers only." He tilted his head, confused but calm. "I am a customer." Amanda let out a small, dry chuckle. "Barely," she snapped. "You've been here less than 30 minutes and spent, what, $20-something? We have a policy. Guests have to spend at least $50 to use that restroom." There. It was. A policy that didn't exist, conjured up on the spot with the confidence of someone who had never been challenged. Dwayne blinked again. "That's not written anywhere." "It doesn't have to be," Amanda barked, arms tightening around her chest. "It's company policy. You think we let just anyone use our facilities?" A pause. Not just silence. Something heavier. The air seemed to press in, as though the room itself was listening now. Dwayne stood still, breathing slowly. "So you're saying," he replied, "I can't use the bathroom because I didn't order enough food?" "Correct," Amanda said without hesitation. "Lucky for you," she added, her tone suddenly chipper. "We do have another restroom in the basement. Service stairs are back there." She pointed toward a narrow hallway, next to the mop sink. That last part she said with a smile. A tight, triumphant, calculated smile, not company policy, not hospitality, a humiliation neatly disguised as procedure. Dwayne didn't move for a moment. He stared at her, no words, no expression. Then finally he asked, "Do other guests use the mop sink entrance? Or is that just for people like me?" Amanda blinked. Her mask slipped for half a second, revealing a crack of uncertainty. Then she rolled her eyes and hissed under her breath, "Don't make this a thing. You people always want to pull that card." That card, as in, "You're making this about race, and I'm the real victim now." Amanda turned her back and walked away before he could reply. And just like that, Dwayne stepped toward the service stairs. No fanfare, no fury, just resolve. The basement smelled like wet drywall and bleach. A single flickering bulb buzzed overhead, casting shadows across exposed pipes and a cracked mirror. The faucet coughed when he turned it on. Water gurgled like it hadn't been used in weeks. The hand towels were paper-thin and disintegrated in his grip, and there, under the broken light, Dwayne looked up at his reflection. No anger, no self-pity, just purpose, because dignity, once denied, doesn't die. It sharpens, and when he returned, it wouldn't be as a customer asking for service. It would be as something else entirely. But the strangest thing wasn't what he found in that dingy restroom. It was what he didn't find when he came back. As he emerged from the basement corridor and stepped into the soft golden light of the main dining room, he paused. Something was off. The noise around him had shifted slightly. A table laughed too loudly. A server moved too quickly past him. But what struck him immediately wasn't the people. It was the emptiness. The table where he had been sitting, the one near the restrooms, was gone. Not occupied. Not reset. Gone. The chair had vanished. The plate, half eaten, gone. The glass of iced tea, gone. Even the napkin he'd folded, carefully across his lap, erased. In its place, an empty patch of floor. A server quietly wiping down a different table a few feet away. Dwayne froze. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't routine. This was erasure. He took one slow step forward and spoke again. This time the voice was colder, darker. "Where's my table?" The waitress looked up, startled. "Oh, I think they thought you'd left," she said. "Someone said you were gone." "I was gone for 4 minutes," Dwayne replied, every word landing like a dropped brick. Amanda reappeared, her timing suspiciously perfect. Her tone was sugary again. "Oh, there you are," she said brightly, like he was a lost child at a shopping mall. "We thought you'd taken off." Dwayne stared at her. "You cleared my table," she shrugged. "Well, we didn't know how long you'd be in the basement. We assumed you'd, ditched the bill." And that was the moment something in him cracked, not loudly, not explosively, but with the precision of a scalpel slicing truth from performance. He stepped forward, his voice dropping to a level that made the room lean in without realizing it. "Don't lie." Amanda's face tightened. "You knew I was still here. You saw me go down that hallway," she scoffed. "I'm not tracking every move of every guest. You left. We cleaned up. If that's a problem, maybe you should talk to management." She smirked. "Oh, wait," she added. "They're not here tonight," but she was wrong. They were here. She just didn't know yet that she was speaking to them. The dining room was too quiet. Not silent, but the kind of quiet that happens when something goes wrong, and no one knows yet if it's safe to react. Forks hovered in midair. Conversations dropped to whispers. Dwayne Johnson stood tall in the middle of the room, right where his table used to be. But this wasn't about seating anymore. Not about the food. Not about the restroom. This was about being erased, and the quiet fury of someone who had been eroded too many times to erupt. Amanda was still playing her part, still leaning into the illusion of authority like it would save her. She scoffed, rolled her eyes. "God, you're making such a big deal out of nothing. It was a table, a plate. You got your food. You want us to roll out a red carpet too." The room bristled. Her voice echoed off glassware and brick like a slap without warning. Dwayne didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. But something had shifted. His energy, once contained like a tide held back, now started to rise with the gravity of something ancient. His next move was quiet but devastating. He reached calmly into his satchel, the same satchel Amanda had probably dismissed as unimportant. From inside, he pulled out a slim black folder. He held it like it mattered, like it held more weight than anything else in the room, and it did. He took a breath, scanning the space. People were watching, not just curious now, engaged, captivated. And that's when he spoke, his voice level but louder, clearer, as if meant for everyone and no one at once. "No," he said, "I don't want a red carpet." He opened the folder. Inside, clean and sharp, lay an official legal document. "I just want my property treated with respect." Amanda tilted her head, confused, defensive. "What is that supposed to be, a Yelp review?" He handed her the document, slowly, deliberately. "This," he said, "is the signed ownership agreement. I bought this chain 2 months ago. The ink on the last piece of paperwork dried this morning across the street in my lawyer's office." Her fingers gripped the paper like it had turned into fire, and for the first time that night, Amanda couldn't speak. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. But nothing coherent came out. She looked around the room, seeking something, someone to interrupt this moment, but it wouldn't come. No distraction, no rescue, just the quiet weight of the truth crashing into her like a slow-moving freight train. He stepped forward, not to intimidate, not to threaten, but to clarify. "Now, tell me," he said, locking eyes with her, "why you treated a paying guest like garbage. Why you made up policies, why you lied, why you cleared my table while I was still here. Why you decided I wasn't worth the decency you offer to strangers who look different than me. It wasn't just a question. It was a cross-examination. Amanda stammered. I didn't know. You should have said something. I thought... You thought I didn't belong, he said, not yelling, not sneering, just stating a fact. And you were right. I don't belong in the corner. I don't belong beside the restroom. I don't belong beneath your assumptions. The air shifted. Again, a ripple passed through the crowd. A table of women stopped eating. A man near the bar shook his head slowly. Someone near the back whispered, "Oh my God!" Amanda's tone grew desperate. "Look, this is just a misunderstanding," she said, forcing a laugh that trembled at the edge. "I was doing my job. I didn't mean any disrespect." "You didn't mean it," Dwayne repeated. "But you delivered it with perfect timing, perfect tone, and perfect aim." Amanda's face flushed deep red. She reached for the document again, holding it like proof of some twisted betrayal. "You're twisting this. I treat everyone the same. You walked in dressed like..." She stopped herself, but it was too late. "Like what?" Dwayne said, stepping forward, eyes locked. "Like someone who couldn't possibly own the building you work in? Like someone who wasn't worth the window seat? Like someone who didn't earn the right to use a bathroom without having to go through a mop closet?" He paused. "Say it." Amanda's breath caught. "This isn't fair," she whispered. "No," he said, "it isn't." And just then the side door opened. Todd, the general manager, rushed in, summoned by a server who had been watching the disaster unfold in real time. His face was tight, brows drawn, eyes flicking from Amanda's expression to the legal document in Dwayne's hand. "What's going on?" Todd asked, though he clearly already knew it was bad. Dwayne turned to him and calmly handed over the document. "Your employee insulted me, lied about policy, blocked me from using a restroom, cleared my table while I was still a paying guest, then pretended it was all some kind of mistake." Todd scanned the paper, then his jaw dropped. "Sir, this is real." "Yes," Dwayne said. "And she didn't know because she never thought I was worth knowing." Amanda turned to Todd. Her composure began to crack. "He set me up. He tricked us. You have to see that." "No," Dwayne said, his voice sharpening. "You set yourself up. All I did was show up hungry." Todd took a step back, eyes wide, chest rising and falling. "Amanda, tell me this isn't true." "I was following policy," she cried. "He made me uncomfortable." That word, uncomfortable, echoed through the dining room like a cold gust. The customers winced. Some turned away. Others leaned in. Todd's voice was flat now. "There is no $50 restroom rule, and you know it." Amanda's mouth opened, but her argument had already expired. Todd turned slowly to her, voice low. "Take off your name tag." "What?" Amanda gasped. "You're firing me? You did this to yourself." He held out his hand. Her fingers trembled as she unclipped the shiny badge, once worn like a crown, now heavy like a chain. She placed it in Todd's hand, eyes darting around the room, begging silently for someone to defend her. No one moved. She turned, stormed toward the door, and then something happened that wasn't in the script. One person clapped, then another, then a third. It wasn't a celebration. It wasn't mockery. It was recognition of someone who stood through disrespect, who never raised his voice, who didn't throw a plate or demand special treatment, who waited. Dwayne didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just stood there, still, as ever, holding nothing but the folder in one hand and the truth in the other, because this wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something far more powerful than ownership. It was about reclaiming dignity in the quietest, sharpest way possible. And now, the silence in the room didn't feel awkward, it felt earned. The clapping eventually faded, but its echo remained in the air like a low hum of justice finally heard. Amanda was gone, pushed not by hands, but by truth and the sound of her own actions playing back in a room full of witnesses. Yet Dwayne Johnson didn't move. He stood at the edge of the dining room, not basking in victory, not collecting congratulations, just watching the door swing shut behind her, like watching a storm pass. The air still smelled faintly of bleach and overcooked trout, but now something else lingered. Accountability, and it wasn't over. Todd, the manager, cleared his throat and tried to gather himself. He held Amanda's name tag like a broken relic, unsure what to do with it now. He looked at Dwayne with a mix of guilt and fear and something else, recognition. "I'd like to review the security footage," Todd said quietly, "if that's okay with you. Just to make sure everything is clean before we escalate to HR." Dwayne nodded once. "Please do." There was no malice in his voice, no trace of revenge, just the calm insistence of a man who had long since stopped demanding justice and simply began expecting it. Todd disappeared into the office behind the bar, while a quiet buzz settled over the restaurant. Diners whispered across their tables. Conversations stopped and restarted. The sound of silverware resumed, but it felt hesitant, like the room wasn't quite ready to pretend nothing happened. And then something curious happened. A young server appeared, holding a tablet in both hands like it was evidence in a courtroom. She looked pale, eyes wide, brows furrowed. She hadn't been part of the drama earlier, but clearly she had been watching closely now. She walked up to Dwayne, hesitated for just a second, and then whispered, "It's all there. I checked." "What is?" Todd asked, stepping back into the room. The girl handed him the tablet. "She told him to use the basement bathroom," the server said, her voice trembling slightly. Then she laughed when he walked away, said something like, "Let's see how long he stays gone." She rolled her eyes and told a busboy to clear the table. She knew he was coming back. Todd took the tablet and brought it to the front, where the audio was connected to the overhead system. He plugged it in, and suddenly, without announcement, the restaurant became a theater. The video played, projected low and quiet, but clear. There was Amanda, arms crossed, standing like a bouncer outside the main restroom. Her voice piped through the speakers. "The main restroom's for customers only." Pause. "We have another one in the basement." Another pause. "Use the service stairs next to the mop sink." Gasps fluttered through the crowd. The footage was crisp. It showed Amanda's expression, her tone, her dismissive gestures. It showed Dwayne walking away in silence. And moments later, the footage cut to the busboy removing the plate, the glass, the napkin, as if erasing someone in real time. Then Amanda again, loudly saying, "He must have ditched the bill." The room sat frozen, and then a voice rose from the corner. "I saw it happen," said a woman in her 60s. She stood slowly, her silver hair tied neatly, pearls around her neck. She walked toward Dwayne, stopped a few feet in front of him, and reached out gently, placing a hand on his forearm. Her eyes shimmered with something between apology and awe. "Thank you," she said, her voice cracking slightly, "for not walking out, for standing through it, for not yelling, even when you had every reason to." Dwayne nodded. The gesture, small but weighty. "Some things," he replied softly, "are worth standing through, and that might have been the end of it, but the internet had other plans." What the restaurant didn't know, what Amanda definitely didn't know, was that a teenager in a hoodie had been live streaming the confrontation from the moment Dwayne returned from the basement. Hidden just below the edge of a tablecloth, the kid had propped up his phone and broadcasted everything. By the time Amanda walked out the door, the stream had already passed 30,000 views. By the end of the hour, it was trending on every platform imaginable. The hashtags multiplied like wildfire. "Let him use the restroom. He owns it. Dine with dignity. You never know who you're talking to with the table. Was never yours." Clips were reshared. Some blurred Amanda's face. Most didn't comment. Sections lit up like bonfires, burning with outrage and empathy. People across the country watched the moment Amanda rolled her eyes. They replayed the line about real customers. They dissected every micro-expression of contempt. And most importantly, they watched Dwayne, stone-faced, measured, refusing to be dragged into anything less than dignity. But Dwayne didn't go on interviews. He didn't call for Amanda's public destruction. He didn't tweet vengeance. He came back the next evening, same table, now restored and polished to perfection, same shirt, same posture, same calm. But this time, the table had a white cloth. The chair was sturdy. The food arrived warm. The silverware was placed gently, and Todd, the manager, stood beside him, not out of obligation, but because he wanted to be there. "We're retraining the entire staff," Todd said quietly, "from top to bottom, not because you're the owner, because you shouldn't have. To be the owner, to be treated like a man." Dwayne didn't say thank you. He didn't need to. He nodded. A few weeks later, something even more unexpected happened. In the quiet corner near the restrooms, where the janitor's closet once defined the limits of respect, a small brass plaque was installed on the wall. It wasn't flashy. No spotlight, no name, no corporate branding, just one sentence, engraved in calm, bold letters. "Every guest deserves dignity, without question, without exception." And when guests asked about it, the staff didn't explain. They simply pointed toward the man who once sat quietly beside the restroom, who never raised his voice, only his standards, because in a world where so many demand attention, he proved that the most powerful voice doesn't need to shout. It just needs to speak the truth and let the room hear itself. The memory of what happened inside that restaurant didn't fade the way most incidents do. It didn't evaporate once the news cycle moved on or once Amanda walked out the door. No, this wasn't one of those stories you scroll past or forget about the next morning. Because what happened that night wasn't just about a bad table, a cold plate, or a bathroom policy that didn't exist. It was about dignity. And dignity, when denied in public, demands a response that echoes far beyond the walls where it was taken. But here's the unexpected part. The story didn't end with a firing. It began there. In the weeks that followed, the restaurant experienced something strange. Business didn't drop, it surged. Not because people were curious about the menu, but because they wanted to see if the plaque on the wall meant something. They wanted to sit at the table, that table, the one that once sat in the shadows, next to a restroom and a janitor's closet, the one where Dwayne Johnson taught the world what grace under fire looked like. Guests began requesting it by name, the corner table, but no one called it that officially. It didn't have a label in the system, it didn't need one. The servers just knew, but something even more unexpected happened. Other businesses took notice. A bakery down the street placed a handwritten sign in its window that read, "Everyone who walks in deserves more than bread. They deserve kindness." A boutique hotel in Charleston emailed its entire staff a copy of the transcript from that night, labeling it required reading. A high school English teacher in Ohio printed out the viral video comments and asked her students to write essays about invisible bias and how it shows up in uniforms. Even major brands, quietly and without press releases, started revisiting their internal policies about what customer worth really means and whether their teams were truly trained to serve, not just judge. And through it all, Dwayne said nothing. He didn't take interviews. He didn't accept podcast requests or speak at panels. He didn't post a follow-up on social media, not once. He wasn't interested in turning what happened into a movement for followers or fame. Instead, he just kept showing up. Same seat, same posture, same silence. But here's what no one expected. Every time Dwayne returned to the restaurant, he left something behind. Quietly, anonymously. One night, he paid for the meal of a single mother dining 2 tables away. No announcement, just a handwritten note delivered with dessert. "You belong here, never forget that." Another night, he left behind a folded envelope containing $500 in tip money for the busboy who had quietly apologized to him the night Amanda had lied. A month later, that same busboy used the money to enroll in a community college hospitality course. Today, he's a full-time assistant manager, and a different kind of assistant manager. That's how legacy works. Not loud, not immediate, but compounding. Then came the plaque. Though Dwayne never asked for it and never mentioned it, Todd, the manager, had the idea after one particular evening when a family from out of town came to dine. They sat near the plaque and asked a server, "Who wrote this?" The server smiled and simply pointed to the corner table where Dwayne once sat. The family got quiet. The father put down his fork and said, "I hope my son remembers this moment more than the food." Todd ordered the plaque. The next morning, he didn't want it flashy. He didn't want it in gold or marble. Just clean, elegant brass. It wasn't about decoration. It was about a statement. And on it, engraved without flourish or font games, were the words that had come to define a standard every guest deserves. Dignity. Without question, without exception. And people did notice. Tourists took photos, bloggers wrote about it, Yelp reviews mentioned it more than the entrees. But the real shift wasn't online, it was internal. Staff started treating every guest like they might be the owner, not because they feared another surprise, but because they finally understood that title or money or status should never have been the bar for basic decency. Something as small as holding a door became sacred. Something as simple as eye contact became an act of respect, not just service, but sincerity, and sincerity once seeded spreads. One night, a woman who had been dining quietly near the center of the room stood up after her meal. She walked to the counter and asked for a comment card. Instead, she asked for the manager. Todd approached expecting a complaint. Instead, she handed him a receipt. At the bottom, she had written, "Tonight, I was served like I mattered. I don't always feel that way. Please tell the man in the white shirt thank you. He changed more than the menu." The table may have been cleared that night Amanda tossed his plate, but the lesson was never wiped clean. It lingered, like the aftertaste of something powerful, not because it was bitter, but because it woke people up. Some began calling it the night of the table. Others, the owner who sat in silence, but Dwayne never called it anything. He never had to, because some things don't need a title to matter. Some things just sit down, order trout, and change the room. And years from now, long after Amanda is forgotten, and long after the viral clips stop trending, that plaque will still be there. Not because of a policy, not because of punishment, but because of a man who refused to accept the seat he was given, and quietly, powerfully, took back the one he always deserved. The table may have been moved, but the message, it never left. The most remarkable part of that night wasn't the confrontation. It wasn't even the reveal that Dwayne Johnson, dressed in simplicity and seated beside a restroom, owned the entire place. No, the most remarkable part was that he never once raised his voice. Not when his food arrived cold. Not when he was told to use a mop-sink bathroom. Not when his table was wiped away as if he'd never been there at all. Because real justice doesn't always arrive with fury. Sometimes it walks in, takes a seat, and waits. Weeks passed. The firestorm online had cooled, but the ripples in real life kept spreading. Sterling's restaurant no longer introduced itself as just an upscale dining experience in Savannah. Now people whispered about it differently. It wasn't about the wine pairings anymore. It was about that night. A night where grace met resistance and patience broke protocol. One night, a man in a blazer approached the host's stand. He requested the owner's table. The hostess, young and newly trained under Todd's updated program, smiled softly. "You mean the table near the restroom?" she asked. The man nodded. She tilted her head and replied, "We've moved it." But the lesson's still there. And yes, the table itself had moved, no longer next to the janitor's closet or hidden under buzzing fluorescent light. It now sat closer to the center, not because of prestige, because of visibility. Because lessons don't grow in shadows. They grow where others can see them. Still, one question lingered for many. Why didn't Dwayne expose her earlier? Why go through all that before revealing he was the boss? The answer came in the form of a whisper, passed from server to server, guest to guest. Someone claimed to have overheard him say it during a quiet lunch a week later. "I wasn't here to test anyone," he said. "I was here to tell the truth without speaking it." That was the twist no one expected. Dwayne wasn't there with an agenda. He didn't plant traps. He didn't stage drama. He walked in, just like anyone else. But unlike most, he knew that silence could be a mirror, and that when people believe no one important is watching, they reveal who they really are. And Amanda, well, she disappeared from public view as expected, but the internet, being the internet, found her. Some condemned, some mocked, some defended. But the real twist came 3 months later, when a small blog post surfaced on an obscure website for restaurant workers. It was titled simply, "I was Amanda." No name, no photos, just text. In it, she described the moment she saw her own face trending online, how her stomach dropped, how she'd always thought of herself as someone firm but fair, how she never realized her body language carried such venom. And then she wrote something no one saw coming. "The worst part wasn't losing my job. It wasn't the cameras or the hashtags. The worst part was realizing I had been performing decency, not practicing it." That line hit differently, because it wasn't an excuse. It was a confession. Still, not everyone forgave. Some said it was too little, too late. Others said accountability wasn't the same as cancellation. But Dwayne? He never commented. He never reposted the blog, never replied, not even a reaction. Because for him, it was never about Amanda. It was about the system that taught people like her they could spot worth at a glance. One Saturday afternoon, a young man walked into the restaurant wearing jeans and a hoodie. He sat alone, ordered tea and a small plate. He wasn't flashy, didn't make noise, didn't pull out a phone, but the staff treated him like royalty. At the end of his meal, he scribbled a note on the back of his receipt and handed it to the server. "This is the first time I've ever eaten somewhere and not felt like I needed to prove I belonged. I don't know who changed this place, but thank them for me." The manager read the note and smiled. Then he walked over to the plaque near the restroom and gently polished the edge with his sleeve. It still read, "Every guest deserves dignity, without question, without exception, simple, unmoving, permanent." There's a strange kind of justice in that, one that doesn't need applause, one that doesn't require spotlights or trending tags. It's the kind that sneaks into the policies no one reads, but now actually means something. The kind that makes a hostess pause before judging someone by their shoes. The kind that makes a busboy stand a little taller, knowing someone once tipped him not for what he carried, but for what he saw. And then there was Dwayne, still showing up, still ordering the same trout, same tea, same grace. But one evening, he did something unexpected. He brought someone with him, a young man. Couldn't have been older than 20, nervous, awkward in his posture. He looked around the restaurant like it wasn't built for him. Like every polished surface reflected back a version of himself that didn't belong. They sat at the middle table, the one now known as the first seat. And Dwayne spoke softly the entire meal, not lecturing, just sharing. At the end, he told the young man one thing, just loud enough for the server to overhear. "You don't need a title to carry yourself like you belong." That was Dwayne's final lesson, the last unexpected detail in a story full of quiet detonations. Because the truth is, anyone can own a table, but not everyone can make it sacred. And when someone like Dwayne Johnson sits down, not to eat, To make a point without saying it. That's not just a meal, that's a message that keeps serving long after the plate has been cleared. In the end, it was never just about the restaurant, not the cold fish, not the fake policy, not even the viral twist of the real owner being seated next to the restroom like an afterthought. That was just the surface. What happened that night, and everything that followed, was about a truth that too many people try to ignore. Dignity shouldn't be earned. It should be automatic. And if it has to be revealed through humiliation, then we've already built the wrong kind of system. But here's the strangest part of all. Even after everything, the exposure, the apology, the retraining, the plaque, Dwayne Johnson never made it about himself. He never stood behind a podium, never released a statement, never filmed a viral monologue about justice or race or corporate culture. Instead, he just kept sitting down, same meal, same table, same quiet strength, and yet every time he did, something shifted. The staff stood straighter. The music seemed a little softer. Conversations felt more aware. It wasn't out of fear. It was something else. Reverence. Because everyone knew what had happened, and more importantly, they knew how it had happened, not with yelling, not with lawsuits, but with patience, presence, and a folder full of truth. One afternoon, an elderly man in a worn military jacket walked into Sterling's. His shoes were scuffed. His hands shook slightly. He asked for a table near the back. The new host, a young woman who had only been on the job a week, smiled and gently replied, "I think you'll prefer this one," guiding him to a well-lit booth near the center. When he asked why, she leaned in and whispered, "Because this is a restaurant that believes in treating people like stories, not stereotypes." That line wasn't on any script. She hadn't been trained to say it. But it echoed the heartbeat of everything Dwayne had taught without ever giving a single speech. Later that same week, something even stranger happened. A family of 4 came in, parents, 2 young daughters. As they were seated, one of the girls looked at the plaque on the wall. She asked her father what it meant. He told her, "It means no matter who you are, you deserve to be treated like you matter." She nodded, and then she asked something that stunned the table. "Even if you wear old shoes?" Yes, especially then. You see, this was never about race or money alone. It was about expectation, about how invisible lines are drawn inside luxury places to quietly separate the expected from the exception. The center tables from the corners, the crystal glasses from the tap water, the smiles from the smirks, and it took one man, sitting, still ordering trout, wearing nothing but quiet confidence, to redraw those lines. But that leads us to one last twist, one detail buried deep in the transcript of that night, rarely mentioned in headlines. After Amanda was fired and Dwayne had resumed his seat, the restaurant returned to normal. Or so it seemed. But toward the end of the night, when the last bites had been taken and the jazz music returned to its lazy rhythm, a young server approached Dwayne, nervous, fidgeting with his apron. He leaned in and asked, "Sir, if you don't mind me asking, why didn't you speak up earlier? You could have stopped all of it in 5 seconds." Dwayne didn't look up right away. He just stirred his tea slowly. Then with a slight smile he said, "If I had said I was the owner from the beginning, I never would have seen who she really was." That was the final lesson. It wasn't about testing others. It was about revealing what happens when you take away the performance mask people wear around perceived power. Because real leadership doesn't need to announce itself. It simply shows up, pays attention, and acts with integrity, even if the world isn't watching. And now, the world is watching, not just this restaurant, but every place where a table placement, a dismissive glance, or a policy can be used as a weapon of quiet exclusion. Other restaurants posted their own reflections. One bakery started a "no" judgment seating campaign. An airport lounge in Denver adopted the plaque's language verbatim and placed it near their first-class entrance. Even a college admissions office reportedly rewrote their front desk welcome script after one of their counselors read about the man with the trout. And yet Dwayne stayed silent. He wasn't chasing virality. He was chasing standards, because standards, once public, have a ripple effect. They become the mirror others hold up to themselves, and the mirror this story created was crystal clear. So, now maybe the question isn't what happened at that restaurant. Maybe the question is, what would have happened if he hadn't owned it? Would Amanda still be there? Would the bathroom policy still exist? Would the server still be a busboy? Would the plaque even be imagined? That's the uncomfortable part. The unexpected detail that sticks. It took ownership to earn basic respect, but Dwayne Johnson flipped that expectation by doing something revolutionary. He earned nothing. He expected everything. Not out of entitlement, but out of principle. And when that principle was denied, he didn't react with rage. He responded with structure. That's why the lesson stayed, because while others walk in with noise, he walked in with stillness, and stillness has a way of unsettling the people who confuse volume with value. Today, the restaurant still serves trout, but it tastes different now. Not because the chef changed the recipe, because the room knows better, and as guests walk by the plaque, most don't say anything, but some pause, some take a photo. Some place their hand on it, like it's holy, and some, especially the ones who've been overlooked before, just nod. Because they know. That table, the one beside the restroom that became the center of a national conversation, was never just a table. It was a line, and now that line has been redrawn, permanently, by a man who never needed to shout to be heard. So if you've ever been underestimated, unseen, or pushed to the corner, remember, you don't need to fight your way to the spotlight. You are the light. Sometimes justice doesn't knock. It sits down, orders trout, and waits. Because when the moment comes, and it always does, the people who judged you will find out you owned the table the whole time. Maybe you've been there, at a table where you weren't really seen. Maybe you've watched someone you love get dismissed like they didn't matter. Or maybe you've realized you were the one holding the clipboard, deciding who belonged and who didn't. But after this story, one truth remains. Every guest deserves dignity, without question, without exception. If this story stirred something in you, hit the like button. If it made you angry or proud or emotional, share your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe more people need to see what quiet power truly looks like, subscribe and turn on the bell, because next time justice might not yell. It might just take a seat and change the room forever.